The shocking truth I found on my wife's phone. In the pulsating heart of New York City, where dreams are born and often shattered, lived a man named Samuel Harris. He was an ordinary man with an ordinary job and an ordinary life, or so he thought. His world was about to be turned upside down by a series of events that would reveal the unseen threads of fate that connect us all. Samuel worked as a software engineer at a bustling tech company, spending his days writing code and his nights dreaming of something more. He had been married to his wife, Emily, for 10 years. Their life together was comfortable, predictable, and seemingly happy. They had a cozy apartment in Brooklyn, a circle of close friends, and a shared love for weekend getaways to the Hamptons. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One crisp autumn evening, as Samuel was preparing dinner, he noticed Emily's phone on the kitchen counter. It was unlocked, and a text message caught his eye. "Can you come earlier? Can't wait to see you again." The sender's name was Mark. Samuel's heart raced as he scrolled through the rest of the messages, each one more damning than the last. Mentions of hotel rooms, late-night rendezvous, and a level of intimacy that no coworker should ever share. He felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and a profound sense of loss. Samuel's world crumbled around him. He felt as if the rug had been pulled out from under him, leaving him to freefall into an abyss of uncertainty and pain. He decided not to confront Emily immediately but to bide his time and plan his next move. He wanted her to feel the same soul-crushing betrayal she had inflicted on him. He wanted her to experience the same pain and humiliation that he was going through. The next day, Samuel did some digging. He found out that Mark was a successful corporate lawyer with a lavish lifestyle. Mark's social media profiles were filled with pictures of exotic vacations, expensive cars, and high-profile events. His wife, Victoria, was a petite woman with sleek brown hair and a sharp jawline. She was the epitome of Manhattan elite, always polished and poised. Samuel hesitated for a moment, wondering if dragging Victoria into this mess was the right thing to do. But the more he thought about it, the more justified it felt. Victoria deserved to know the truth about her husband, just as much as Samuel deserved justice for Emily's lies. Samuel waited outside Mark's high-rise on the Upper East Side. The building was a fortress of glass and steel, the kind of place where lives of luxury unfolded behind closed doors. When Victoria stepped outside, wearing a tailored trench coat and carrying a leather tote, Samuel made his move. "Excuse me, Victoria," he called out, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. She paused, her heels clicking to a stop on the pavement. "Yes," she replied, her voice cool and composed. "We have something in common," Samuel said, his tone calm and deliberate. Victoria stared at him, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Samuel showed her the messages between Emily and Mark. Victoria's face remained stoic, but Samuel could see the cold determination settling in her eyes. "Do you have a plan?" Victoria asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Samuel nodded, the gears in his mind spinning faster now. "Yes, I do. And it involves you." Over the next hour, they sat in a nearby cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. They huddled over a small table, their voices low as they plotted their next move. Victoria was not the type to crumble under pressure. She was the type to retaliate, and Samuel knew they were in this together now. They decided to confront Emily and Mark, but not just to embarrass them. They wanted to turn their world upside down, to make them feel the pain they had inflicted on others. The plan was simple on the surface, but deeply layered in its execution. They would confront Emily and Mark at the Chelsea Lounge, where they were meeting that evening. Samuel and Victoria arrived at the lounge, their hearts pounding with a mix of nerves and fury. The dimly lit room was filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. They spotted Emily and Mark, sitting in a booth, laughing softly over shared secrets. "Surprised to see me, sweetheart?" Samuel asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Emily's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "I thought you were home," she stammered, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "I was," Samuel replied, his tone icy. "But then I got this funny feeling that I was missing out on something. And look, I was right." Mark, meanwhile, was desperately trying to manage the situation. "This is ridiculous," he said, his chair screeching against the floor as he stood up. "Victoria, let's go." But Victoria didn't move. Instead, she leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "No, Mark, you can go. I'm staying right here." The confrontation at the lounge was just the beginning. Samuel and Victoria returned to Samuel's apartment, the adrenaline that had carried them through the night fading, replaced by a heavy exhaustion. They sat in the living room, nursing glasses of bourbon, the weight of what they had done settling in. They knew they couldn't just embarrass Emily and Mark. They needed to hit them where it hurt, to make them feel the kind of pain they had inflicted on others. "Mark's a big-shot lawyer, right?" Samuel said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Someone with a reputation to protect. And Emily, well, she's built her whole life on this image of being the perfect wife and mother. What happens when we expose them for what they really are?" Victoria's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. "You're talking about going public." "Not just public," Samuel said, his voice firm. "Controlled. Precise. We don't just throw this out there. We craft it, make it a story, a scandal that will ruin them." The next morning, Victoria sent an email to Mark's boss, attaching everything: texts, photos, even the receipts. It was done. There was no turning back now. By noon, the fallout had begun. Victoria's phone buzzed with a message from one of Mark's colleagues. "He's been called into the office," she said, holding up the screen for Samuel to see. But the night wasn't over yet. There was one more step to the plan, and it was the most personal one yet. Samuel and Victoria walked through the heart of Manhattan, the city humming with life around them. Lights flickered from the high rises above, and the distant sound of a saxophone echoed from a street performer on the corner. It should have been a peaceful night, but inside Samuel and Victoria were a storm of emotions. They arrived at a high-end gala, where they knew Emily and Mark would be attending. The night air was crisp, and the distant sound of a saxophone echoed from a street performer on the corner. As they entered the gala, all eyes turned to them. Victoria wore a sleek black gown that turned heads the moment they stepped into the ballroom, and Samuel traded his usual casual attire for a tailored tuxedo. They approached Emily and Mark, who were already seated, their faces pale and tense. "Good evening," Samuel said smoothly, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "A night of glamour and cherry. What's not to love?" Mark's eyes narrowed. "You've made your point. Haven't you done enough?" "Not quite," Victoria replied, her smile sharp as a blade. "You see, tonight is a special occasion. A celebration, really." Emily frowned. "Celebration of what?" "Of exposure," Samuel said, his tone cheerful. "Mark Blackwell, please step forward." Mark froze, his face draining of color. Emily's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Don't," she hissed, but it was too late. The crowd parted, and all eyes fell on Mark as he reluctantly moved toward the stage. Samuel and Victoria followed, their steps measured and deliberate. Once they were in full view, the host smiled and said, "Mark, your reputation precedes you, but tonight we'd like to share a different side of your story." A screen descended from the ceiling, and a projector flickered to life. The room fell silent as the first image appeared, a text message between Emily and Mark. The crowd gasped, and whispers rippled through the room. "Is that his mistress? She's married to, isn't she? I can't believe this. And Mark Blackwell of all people." Samuel and Victoria stood side by side, savoring every second of it. They had turned the tables, exposing the betrayal and lies that had been hidden in the shadows. The scene at the gala unraveled faster than they could have imagined. Mark's face remained frozen in a pale mask of shock, while Emily clutched his arm like a lifeline. Around them, the whispers grew louder, rippling through the crowd like a wave. "What do we do now?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling as she tugged at Mark's sleeve. "We have to leave." But Mark didn't move. He just stood there, defeated, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his disgrace. Samuel leaned closer to Emily, his voice low but firm. "Leaving won't change anything. Everyone knows now. You might as well stay and face the music." Mark looked away, unable to meet Victoria's gaze. The host of the gala, sensing the tension, quickly moved on to the next part of the program, but the damage was done. Emily and Mark's perfect world was crumbling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. In the days following the gala, the dust began to settle, but the wreckage of Emily and Mark's lives was unmistakable. Their affair was no longer a dirty little secret. It was public knowledge, and the ripple effects were devastating. Mark's law firm acted swiftly. issuing a public statement condemning his actions. Emily's social circle seemed to shrink around her, the life she had so carefully curated gone, replaced by a heavy silence. A week after the gala, Emily showed up at Samuel's apartment. She looked fragile, a shadow of the woman he once knew. Her eyes were red from crying, her makeup smeared as if she hadn't slept in days. "Samuel," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" Samuel didn't invite her in. Instead, he stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. "What is there to talk about, Emily? You had a husband who loved you, who supported you, who gave you everything. And that wasn't enough." Emily shook her head, sobbing. "I know I was selfish. I know I ruined everything. But I swear it didn't mean anything. It meant enough for you to throw away our marriage. It meant enough for you to lie to my face over and over again." Emily reached out, her hand trembling, but Samuel stepped back, out of her reach. "Please, Samuel," she whispered. "I'll do anything to make this right." Samuel's expression hardened. "I've already filed for divorce. You'll hear from my lawyer soon." Emily's face crumpled, and for a brief second, Samuel felt a pang of guilt. But it wasn't enough to change his mind. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Samuel closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The chapter was finally closed. A month later, Samuel and Victoria met for coffee. It was strange seeing each other outside the chaos of their shared ordeal. They sat in a cozy cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The sun streamed in through the large windows, casting a warm glow on their faces. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had walked through hell and come out the other side. "You're stronger than you think, Samuel," Victoria said softly, her eyes meeting his. "So are you," Samuel replied. "Any plans?" Victoria sighed, glancing out the window. "I've been thinking about leaving the city. Maybe start fresh somewhere new, a clean slate." Samuel nodded. "Sounds like a good idea. What about your career? You mentioned you were thinking about starting your own business." Victoria's eyes lit up. "Yes, I've always wanted to open a boutique, something small and personal, where I can curate unique pieces. I think it's time to take that leap." Samuel smiled. "That sounds amazing. I have no doubt you'll be successful." Victoria returned the smile. "Thank you, Samuel. What about you? Any plans for the future?" Samuel took a sip of his coffee, his mind racing with possibilities. "I've been thinking about taking some time off to travel. Maybe explore Europe or South America. I've always wanted to see the world, and now seems like the perfect time." Victoria's eyes widened. "That sounds incredible. I always wanted to travel more too. Maybe we can exchange postcards from our adventures." Samuel laughed, a genuine laugh that reached his eyes. "I'd like that. It would be nice to stay in touch, even if we're on opposite sides of the world." As they parted ways, Samuel felt a sense of closure. He was ready to start over, this time on his terms. The unseen threads of fate had brought him and Victoria together, and now they were both ready to weave new stories, new lives, and new beginnings. Samuel spent the next few weeks tying up loose ends at work and making arrangements for his travels. He sold his apartment, donated most of his belongings, and packed a single suitcase with the essentials. He felt a sense of freedom and excitement that he hadn't experienced in years. On his last day in New York, Samuel took a long walk through Central Park. The leaves were changing colors, painting the park in hues of red, orange, and gold. He sat on a bench, watching as children played and couples strolled hand in hand. He felt a sense of peace wash over him, a knowing that he was on the right path. As he stood up to leave, he noticed a small, delicate feather resting on the bench beside him. He picked it up, twirling it between his fingers. It was a sign, a reminder of the unseen threads of fate that connect us all. He tucked the feather into his pocket, a memento of his journey and a symbol of the new chapter he was about to embark on. With a deep breath, Samuel walked away from the bench, away from the park, and away from the life he had known. He was ready to embrace the unknown, to explore the world, and to write a new story for himself. The unseen threads of fate had led him here, and he was grateful for every twist and turn along the way. As he stepped onto the plane, his heart pounded with excitement and anticipation. He was leaving behind the pain and betrayal of the past, and stepping into a future filled with endless possibilities. He was ready to start over, to live life on his terms, and to embrace the unseen threads of fate that would guide him on his journey.